All right, well, good morning. Good to see everybody again. So I came in this morning and all these parts were filed up. I wonder if like a filing elf or something lives in Stuart's shop. But I'll pass this around to start with. I'll just include one of the staples. Well, I'll include the top staple. You can see that I filed up the knob a little bit. I did just like a really coarse filing on the handle. And then I got all these bearing surfaces flat and smooth. Um, I would go a lot more if I was gonna like send this out in my shop, but it's just kind of the bare bones of enough for it to work. You can feel that slides really nicely there. And then I also punched two holes in the top plate for that staple to be put into. Um, so that will slide back and forth. The bottom one hasn't been applied yet, and I'm going to punch those holes later so you guys can see that. So I'll start it over here. Y'all can pass that around. In the meantime, um, I'm going to finish up the bending on this Suffolk latch. So I also did the file work on that the other day. And there's one hole punch because somebody had a question about the hole punching. I was like, oh, I'll just show you. But I'll do the rest in front of y'all. And then Brodus can explain here what he's working on.
Maybe. Someone had a piece of mystery metal. They want to know what it is. I want to know what it is too because I got some strange qualities to it.
Oh, so while we're heating this stuff up, I'll maybe talk a little bit more about what goes through my head when I do my work and how I like to do my work. So this kind of comes from a book called The Nature and Art of Workmanship by David Pye, which ironically, when I was looking up that Peter Ross quote the other day, I realized Peter makes the exact same point also from David Pye in his thing. So I didn't try to copy everything Peter says, but it just kind of worked out that way. But basically, David Pye relates art and craft to writing with a pencil versus a more mechanical mindset of writing with a typewriter. If you write the letter J with a typewriter, uh, Peter says no matter how inept the workman, that J is always going to come out the exact same. And you could call that the workmanship of certainty. There's really no risk involved there. Um, sure, there's some ways to mess it up with a typewriter, a computer even less, but you're going to get the exact result. Now, that doesn't give you a lot of leeway if you want to change, certainly typewriter, change the font of a J. You can't do that. If you want it smaller or larger, you can't do that. So it really limits what you do. I prefer to do work that's much more similar to drawing with a pencil. I can write J in cursive. If I really wanted to, I could do it in Times New Roman, or I could also draw the Mona Lisa with that same pencil. So that's the way I like to work. I don't like to use a lot of jigs and fixtures. I like to be able to shape the metal as much as possible just with the hammer and just with the anvil. If I'm introducing other tools, I want them to be able to be used on other things and not just make the same product. The reason that shows up so much in 18th century ironwork is, again, a blacksmith is a local workman. So, all the axes that the community has being shipped over from England may have been made by a dozen axe manufacturers that all have a different size drift. So if the blacksmith is going to tool up and make a different drift for every single axe repair he's doing, or different set of fullers for every repair job with that, it's going to be real hard. So I think it emphasizes a lack of specific tooling just because of how varied that work is. So that's really how I like to work. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and make this bend. I'm gonna do it here at the vise. Unfortunately, this probably isn't the best view for everybody. Um, but what I'll do is I'll clamp it in the vise, then I'll actually hit with the peen. And before I do that, I will quench the end so I can be sure that it's not going to leave an imprint where my thumber is going to be. There's a little bit more heat on that. Yeah. Of the book? I think it's The Nature and Art of Workmanship by David Pye. He wrote a bunch of books, but I'm pretty sure that's the one. I've got it on a bookshelf at home, so I could probably fact check that a little better when I get home. All right, so I'm just gonna quench it up to almost all the way through that boss section, clamp it in the vise, bend out, and then strike the peen to make that nice bend. While I've got that part hot, I'm going to make a little bit of an adjustment to tweak. But now you can see the result of that bend is very similar to your original. It almost goes just a touch farther than where it comes back to, if that makes sense. And that's just because you hit it there, struck it with the peen. All right, so I'll flip it around, do the same thing on the other side. Yeah. I did, yeah. No, I already got him. Yeah, I meant to tell you, I'm sorry. So Brodus is gonna be punching a hole here for a bolster. And with stock that big, it can act as its own bolster when you do that, which is really nice.
So I want to explain why I'm making this right now. What I'm going to be doing today is making the pintles for the hinges. And with those pintles, it's very important that not only do I have a bolster with a hole in it, but I have a bolster that is flat across the top of it. I could probably make do with this bolster, but I really want to show how that tool can help with the work. I don't want this tool to influence the work. So kind of the opposite of what Josh is saying in some way. That you do want kind of vague tools that can do a lot of jobs for you, but at the same time, you need those tools to be right. That trying to make do with tools that are not helping you is going to waste your time. In this case, the shape of this tool is really going to influence the shape of the piece I'm making, so I need it to be right. But I can also use this tool for 5 other jobs, so it is a tool worth having. I'll leave this tool with the shop.
All right, so you can see there, that bend, that's pretty short there. I think I had a pretty deep, some deep bends. So I'll just kind of try to work that out and flatten it up, extend it a little bit. There's also a chance that I didn't taper it out quite enough, and I find these to be pretty challenging to nail just right on length. And I'll make one and then forget to measure and keep thinking about it. So that obviously is very wonky. I'm gonna take another heat and make that look a little bit nicer.
My hammer's drying out.
Another goal of the demo today is not to drop as many things.
So is it my turn this time?
I guess so. You can take a shift. Kind of like Steven was saying yesterday, you kept pointing back to his mill. And I keep going to nowhere to look for my tools. It's like, like, oh, my cabinet's over there. It's like, I don't even know where I'm going. So it's funny how muscle memory really changes how you work. It's a miracle Brodus hasn't lifted his arm for the bellows handle this weekend.
It's bellows, big double chamber bellows, and compared to any various air supply I've used before, I prefer the bellows over it all. That's not me being a traditionalist, they just work so well that the quantity of air and the pressure of the air is really fantastic. And you get a really fine amount of control for not a lot of effort. It looks like effort when you're doing this, but it's actually, if they're built right, they should be pretty light. So I prefer bellows over just about anything else. Bellows? What is the question? In the Western world, but it's not the same all over the world. There's different styles of bellows, different operations. There's no. There are a couple of other niche things that aren't bellows that are working, but no hand cranks. Those come along later.
Right, it does. Yeah, so you have a reservoir on top. And I mean, I'd say 90% of the museum bellows I've seen don't have a large enough reservoir, like the reproduction ones, don't have a large enough reservoir.
A lot of folks build them even. When you build the bellows, you really want the upper chamber to be twice as large as the lower chamber, because the bottom chamber is just pumping. It's just up and down and up and down. The top one, it's pumping up and up and up. And then once it's up here, I can stop pumping and it's going to slowly deflate. That's another thing I see folks get wrong sometimes on building their own bellows, is having both chambers feed into the nozzle. It's pointless. The reason you have two chambers is to separate them. Only the upper chamber feeds to the nozzle. We did. We have a surviving pair of 18th century bellows in our collection, and we had our woodworkers make us the woodwork. We have a fine leather working shop. They usually do the leather work on them for us. We made the hinges and all the nails go around them. There were bellows makers at the time.
Bellows repairmen.
Yeah, I was gonna say
a whole industry.
I'm no theater kid, but there's I think it's Shakespeare. There's a Midsummer's Night.
I don't know.
There's a character who is a bellows mender as a profession. That consider if you're in a big industrial city like Birmingham, where ironworking is the industry, and all of these shops are powered by bellows. Well, now you have bellows repairmen who go around and fix bellows for that they were the powerhouse of industry.
All right, so,
Yeah.
You talked about the anatomy of your drift.
Sure.
When you're making a drift, what you really look for?
Yeah, so Josh made this drift for me, but he made it correctly. Did a good job. Looking at it, what I want a taper. I want a straight section, I want another taper. steep taper here should be really shallow. That if it's a really steep taper, it's just, you're going to struggle to push it through the metal. You're going to smear the metal more than stretching the metal to the sides. Where with this shallow taper, it's going to more gradually push the metal out. I want that. Then the straight section here, I want that straight so that whether I'm doing a hole that's only half an inch thick or I'm doing a hole that's 1.5 inches thick, I've got some area there that I can reference as a true cylinder. I want that cylinder. And I want the taper on the back side as well. I don't want it to just come off as an end. That here in driving it through the piece, this piece is thin enough that once I get past this point, the drift can clear through and just fall free. The other thing is that as you work this, that end is naturally going to mushroom. This is just a mild steel drift. That's all I use for my drifts. Unless it's really small, but for ordinary drifts, I just use mild. That's a mushroom. If that's tapered, that mushroom is going to still stay within the 1/2 inch cylinder for a little bit longer. So it gives me a little bit more time before I have to rework the tool. That's what I look for in an ordinary drift.
You run that drift through 4 to 6 pounds.
Why am I doing that? Yeah. Well, the metal's cooling down. As metal cools down, it contracts. So while I drifted it when it was orange, and it might have been a 1/2 inch hole when it was orange, it's not a 1/2 inch hole now that it's black. So I drifted it through before and it was fine, but now it looks fake. So as it cools down, by running the drift through it again and again, I can do that. Another thing that I'll sometimes do is I'll just set the drift there and let it cool like that. I mean, I could even take this, do that, shock it. The other thing, in the shop where I normally work, I don't have the luxury of getting 1/2 inch round bar. If you have a 1/2 inch round bar, you know it's 1/2 inch round, you know it's a circle. You just use that as a reference. Any bar that I work with that's round, I have to hammer it round. Am I going to hammer it perfectly round? Probably not. So by repeatedly putting the drift through, I'm not consciously thinking of it, but I'm still letting how to pick it up, picking up exactly the same way. Every time I set it in here, it's not being set in exactly the same way. So if there is an inconsistency in the round of the drift, by putting it through many times, now I'm spreading out that inconsistency all around the hole and it's becoming a more even circle. It's tight again.
All right, so I just finished up the bend on here. You probably noticed I completely unbent it and rebent it. So that should have been a 2-heat process, but I messed it up, so I had to go back. I still don't love that bend, but I think that's going to be close to the best that we're going to get. So I'm just going to brush this and let it cool down slowly. Stuart's going to go and drill the holes for us. Yeah, I'm not allowed to touch a drill press, but Stuart can. Right.
So there's the bolster the way I want it. I've got a nice 1/2 inch round hole. There.
So putting the punch back in here, you're almost kind of chamfering that out.
Yeah, I was just trying to chamfer it a little bit. At my workbench, I've got a countersinking punch that I made, just like a countersinking drill bit, but it's got a 45-degree angle to the face of it in a cone. So I could set that on there and really give it a chamfer. I think this will do fine for today. Ideally, I would just give it a really light chamfer, not much, just a light chamfer. Kind of the same idea as we were just talking about. You want that a gradual lead in. Well, if that's a sharp corner right there and I'm trying to drive a piece through it that's not perfectly fit to that, well, that sharp corner is going to cut in and find and put cold shuts in the work. So if it's just eased over a little bit, it's not going to bite my work as badly. Or at least it'll give me some warning that it's not fitting.
Yeah. He was asking, what does a drill bit look like for steel or iron at the time? Oh, it's inside.
So the drill bits, I always find this wild because folks ask us, oh, that must be the most incredible thing to make because they're thinking of a spiral bit. We don't have spiral bits, at least not for iron. You're cutting so slowly with a drill at the time that you don't need those flutes. The whole point of the flutes is to get your chips out of the way, right? If you're doing this, that's not a problem anymore. What I find crazy is that the actual cutting edges have not changed. The very end of the drill bit, if you look at that where those two cutting edges are and two planes against each other, right, and they come to a little chisel at the tip, it's the same. 250 years ago, it's the same geometry right there at the tip of the drill. That's not changed. Now behind that, instead of having those spiral flutes come up, usually it's a sort of little spade shape that goes up into a sort of square neck, and then instead of having a chuck that can grab a cylinder, you have a chuck that just has a tapered square hole in it, like a tinsmithing stake. You're familiar with those? You got a stake plate, you got your stake goes in there, they socket one in the other. Same with the drills.
You can put it right here, then, right here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Oh. I was like, that got lighter for some reason.
Let go of it, Emma.
All right, so quickly while he's doing that, I'm gonna start working on the lift latch.
You've got, this is a square taper, this is all square, that's just a flat section there. This is what it looks like. Look at it from the nose, just like a drill bit today. Of course, today you've got a cylinder, and this flute is going to wrap around there, and this flute is going to wrap around there. But it's the same little piece in the middle. That happens from the side. Just flat. So this section here, it just needs to be a smaller diameter than this point to this point, right? That rotates around the center, right? That's going to make a hole that is of that diameter. So all of this just needs to clear that space. That's how they're constructed. I wouldn't suspect so. With the strain that the drill bit's going to take through the shaft, if it were iron, you'd just twist it. That there is this rule that most tools are made mainly out of iron with a steel tip so that you can serve on the cost of steel. Steel is expensive. But there are certain things that are made all of steel if they have to be. And I think drill bits are one of those cases. Unless it was a very large drill bit, I wouldn't expect it to be made otherwise.
Yeah,
and they do have drill presses. They have those as well. A couple different contraptions for it.
Yeah, so I just made a set down, and I'm taking those corners, and I first made it an octagon. Now making it a little bit more true of a circle. This is going to be essentially the same end as Brodus's hinges here, like that. So.
I'm missing the steel.
What steel?
I need a piece of 1/2-inch square bar. Yesterday it was yay-ish long.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
Is that square? Yeah, this square. Square.
That's what I was looking for.
So what Brodus just brings up is a good time to talk about some of the economic pressures of an 18th century workman, which is why these shapes look the way they do. Material cost is more expensive than labor at the time. So you see these forms that are real drawn out. They don't look anything like their parent bar stock. They're very thin, they're very conservative. And that's because you're going to generate most of your efficiency by reducing the amount of material in that object. In fact, these objects are sold by weight, just like anything that is, expensive by weight is going to be sold by weight. Kind of lost my train of thought from there. Oh, that's not to say that labor uh, isn't important. You're going to be judging efficiency by both, so you have to be quick and save material. But there might be times, and oftentimes, where having a little bit more labor will actually be cheaper than sending out a much heavier object. It's less cost to the manufacturer. What I think that does is it creates shapes that are just naturally very pleasing. You're going to taper a section because it thins it out. You're going to completely touch every part of the bar, and that really makes the shape, I think, a lot more interesting than just making maybe a fire poker out of 3/8 square. You taper one end, you make a curl, and then you taper the other end for the poker, and it's still 90% the parent bar stock. So I really like doing work that, you can't really tell what it came from when it's finished.
So I'm going to start forging on the pencil. The way that these pencils are constructed is it's one piece welded around another piece to form them. So I have to start out by forming
Yeah,
the pin.
that's not surprising.
One thing
Yeah.
I'm going to do,
Well, and I often get a twist on those.
I'm going to determine how long I need the pin to be. So if I account for a 1/2 inch under the hinge and a 1/2 inch over the hinge, I'm just eyeballing it. That's how long I need to forge it round. Now there is actually a good reason that I'm going to forge this round instead of just starting with a round bar. Through the oxidation of welding one piece to the other, I'm anticipating that my pin is going to get smaller than when I start, even if I don't touch it with the hammer. So if I forge it round and intentionally leave it a little bit heavier than 1/2 inch, I'll have a better chance of hitting 1/2 inch when I'm finished.
Yeah, what's nice about going right to 1/2 inch squares, as you hit those corners, you will thicken up the flats a little bit. And that'll be just enough typically for your planishing blows to bring it back down to 1/2 inch round. If you have to, though, you can make it a little oversized.
So one thing I find with doing hinges and pentles is that a lot of the measurements are really, really subtle and small. I have, listening to the demo in the afternoon yesterday, talking about thousandths of an inch, I realized I never measured thousandths of an inch, but I do think about thousandths of an inch. That's the terms I'm forging with right now. That I need this round bar to be a couple thousandths bigger than ½ an inch. Now, rather than measuring it, I have to do it by feel. I'm just going to eyeball it and understand I'm going to hit it this much, and that's going to be enough. And I found with a lot of, especially pintles, I have a really hard time doing any calculations to figure out the right amount of material that's needed. Just trial and error, I find is the best way to figure out what's right. And I'll show you what I think right looks like once I get to it.
All right, so you can just see we're pulling a forward taper here. We'll make it a little bit longer. It's a very simple forging. Maybe if I have time, I'll add a handle to it. But once we're done with this, we'll go ahead and start fitting up the slide bolt. Yeah, that's probably a good time. Thank you.
You said an 8?
Ish, yeah. If it looks too big, just make it a little smaller. It'll probably be fine. You want to take that? So when you make these pintles, typically you want them to be maybe 3/8 of an inch higher than your hinge is. On one of them though, typically the bottom, it's best to make it a little bit taller. What that means is when you go to slide the door on, you can get that first one in and then lift it up and it'll slide down. But if you make them the same height, you have to, it's like, lining the bridge of the gun, the gun sights up. So it's a lot easier if you make them one just a little bit longer.
In fact, we were talking about Moxon a lot. I swear I should have brought the book with me. And someone asked if Moxon is the blacksmithing Bible for 18th century forging. And it isn't, kind of isn't. But one of the things in the carpentry section on Moxon, he talks about setting doors on hinges, and one of the things he says is your bottom pintle ought to be made a little bit longer than the top one, and if it's not, take it to a blacksmith and have it made that way. That specifically, you need to get this done right, otherwise it's a complete hassle to mount the doors.
So if I had it laying around, I probably would have done this in 1/4 by 3/4 stock. But that was just sitting around, so I figured I'd just taper it down. But just another example of don't be limited by what stock size you have. Certainly if you have a coal fire, there's many times, especially when we're working with wrought iron, we'll take, tiny scraps and weld them together and draw them out. Certainly us apprentices, it kind of depends on what the job is, but when you're first learning, you're going to be learning in all mild steel. You don't want to blow through the wrought iron. And then as a journeyman, cuts off a piece of wrought iron, you scurry over the anvil and grab it, and you kind of stow it away, and then, later you weld them all together. And so you kind of get the droppings as an apprentice sometimes. Whenever Brodus and I made wrought iron stock locks in December, and we made like 16 gauge plate out of wrought iron. I had a couple pieces of half-inch plate that I welded together to beat all that out. So that's a lot of drawing, which is why, striking, we're very proficient working with each other, because, we'll,
You have to be.
probably hundreds of hours we've struck together in the last 2 years. Yeah, so they're both gonna be like this. Man, I get so frustrated when I go to a historic site, because the chain link ones today, they mount opposite. So if you hire a contractor for your historic site to install pinholes, they almost always do them the modern way. And I think the theory there is you can't steal a gate that way, but you don't really see them going the opposite way.
Bearing on the pintle.
Yeah.
So if it's mounted this way, it's only bearing on that pintle, not both of them. And if it's a gate to a farm, well, who cares if they're mounted this way? You can jump over the gate. If you really want to get through, that's not stopping you. If it's a door in a building, when you close the door sits inside the door frame. You can't lift it out of the door frame until you open the door. So they're not insecure. They're just still on there.
All right, so this is nearing done. Awesome, right in time for that to come back. I'll take another heat, not one more, but another. And yeah, changing my my words up. And we'll go ahead and punch a hole in this plate right at the end. That's a little big, but that'll be fine.
So I just upset the end of it a little bit. So one end I've got with the taper. You put the taper there because that makes it easier when you're mounting the hinge, that it's a little bit smaller. You've got more leeway here and there rather than if it's a perfect cylinder all the way up. Here at the bottom, that's where the weld is going to be. That's where one piece is going to wrap around the other. Because I'm going to weld it, through welding, it's bound to get smaller than it was before. I need some meat there to actually hammer on. So I've upset it just a little bit to give myself room to weld. Just a little.
All right, before we break this out, I want to show what I did wrong just then. So I started Brodus with the flat side down, punch on top. What that does is you have full contact. That's where you want to go. And you come to the other side, do your other one, you have to be off. And now you go to your bolster. And because I have a set down, there's no flush plane for it to sit. So we should have started it this way, and I just corrected it with another go around. But it's much more efficient to do it right the first time. And now we have full contact along the back. Good job there. I didn't set it right, Brodus knew it, and he didn't strike. He earned his pay today. There we go. Thank you. So yeah, there's just little tricks like that that can save you from accidentally dinging your work if you punch to the wrong side first, or just an extra motion.
The question I just received was, why do you make it one way versus the other way? Let me draw what the finished pintle would look like. One to the other is to form bearing surface. Then with that little bent one, all you have for a bearing surface is a 1/2-inch strip. So you've got the barrel of your hinge here, 1/4 of an inch thick area, bearing on top of a 1/2-inch little strip there, that's barely anything. For light hinges, that's fine. For heavier hinges, that's not enough. And I've seen them where through years of hinging, open and close and open and close, it wears down through them like it's just gradually cutting through that pintle. Here, the entire surface of this bottom, you're bearing on the entire surface of that there. That's really where it needs to be strong. And another thing that may come up, we'll see how it goes. Sometimes the welds between the bottom and the pin aren't perfect. However, if you really think about it, that weld isn't taking a lot of strain. What's really taking strain is that bearing surface, and the pin just has to keep it on the bearing surface. And the weld just has to keep the pin connected to the bearing surface, but it's not actually being strained against the weld.
Did they ever put like a round bushing in there or is that more modern?
That'd be modern. Yeah. I mean, think of trying to form a bushing without a lathe.
Well, they had lathes.
Yeah, but it's a lathe you got to hold a chisel
Right.
against.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying
And you don't
that
have
way people know they had lathes. But
Yeah,
you're
they do.
probably not going to have one in the local
Yes.
shop.
Well, the lathe that you think of isn't the
Door-
lathe that they have.
Yeah.
That if it's turning done in the period, it's usually done between centers. So everything needs to be done between centers. It's essentially
Yeah.
a wood lathe. So consider trying to turn a brass bushing on a wood lathe. And the wood lathe doesn't even have a chuck. Nice wood lathes, you got a nice chuck, it'll clamp down on the piece. They don't really have those. There are state-of-the-art lathes at the time in Canon Works where they do actually operate more akin to modern lathes. The scale of that machine is so great that they're able to achieve it. So for our purposes, not a concern.
All right, so my lift bar there is done. I meant to talk earlier with the Suffolk latch about what we refer to affectionately as the journeyman angle. So you'll make something, you'll be real proud of it, you think it's great, and you hand it to like Mark Sperry. The first thing he's gonna do, he's not even gonna really look at it, is he's gonna go like this. And he's gonna look at that angle. I don't know what angle you call that. For door hardware, it's important because if it's twisted, it's not going to mount flush. And it can look absolutely stunning at your glamour angle, right, on your diagonal. But once you kind of put it in plane to itself, it reveals a lot. And it's something when I go to Fred's shops, I always will look at that. Like they have something there on the anvil, and I look at it. I won't say anything, but more often than not, something is out of really, it's twisted is what it is. But I think that's just a really important angle, especially for door hardware to check. So as my stuff comes around, make sure you guys check that and critique it. I call so like the glamour angle would be like if you're taking a photo off at a corner. Man, that hides like so many things. I hardly ever post a photo of something straight on because you can see all the issues. But if you're just ever so slightly at the edge, I mean, no one can tell if your filing's a little bit off center or your shapes aren't exactly the same. All right, so I'll go ahead and put together this slide bolt. So some of y'all may have noticed as it was going around that, well, probably not if this was attached like that, but last night I took my slide bolt. There we go, dropping things. Right, and I laid it at about center, and I took 2 scribe marks down to make it parallel. So now I know where my holes need to be punched. That's a way of essentially thinking about measurements not in exact, to the inch, but it's all relative to what I've got there. So this is certainly less than an inch now, but I don't care that it's, 7/8 and a couple thousandths over. It's what this is, and everything's going to be formed to that basically. So I will go ahead and punch my holes now. So I've got a rectangular hole there, and then likewise a rectangular punch. And this plate's small enough that I can do it cold. So there's a plug already in there, so I'm just going to break that out. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of set my punch in the hole, and I'm going to pick it up. And I'm going to kind of just hover over that hole so that when my punch comes down, it's about in the right spot. I'll give it a hit. And what that'll do is it'll push a little out the back, and now I can use that to register into the hole. I want to make sure that it's square. If it's left or right or crooked, then my staple will either not go in or be crooked. So register that in the hole. Hit. Can release. And then I can just wriggle my plug out from here. So again, similar to yesterday, that's your piece that's come out, very tiny, and then there's your hole. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to push some past. It's going to make a little bit of a rag. So then what I'll do is I'll hammer that down, and I'm going to fill this in again, just a little ways. Now what I used to do is I would take a set of needle files, and I would be there for a couple minutes filing that out. And then a buddy of mine said, why don't you just use the punch and push that out again? And so what you can do is then flip it over the other side, use your punch, and you just push it back and forth until that rag comes out. And now you've got a hole that can act as its own bolster. And I like to do that versus putting it back on the bolster, because at that point the bolster just you just keep having the same issue, back and forth and back and forth. So
real quick here before I carry on with the pintle,
I'll get that in
some
a
of
second.
the prep I'm doing. If you recall yesterday when Josh welded the collar, one of the important details was that that collar before welding did not touch at the ends. Well, it's the same with doing the pintle. I'm also welding a collar. I'm just welding a collar that's connected to a bar. So as I prepare it to wrap around one piece to the other, I don't want it to close. If it closes, I'm not going to get a good weld. I have to prepare it in such a way that there is a gap behind it. And it looks really precarious when you start. It looks like this isn't going to work. You've got this giant gap that's not going to close. But pretty quickly you realize, well, that wasn't even enough gap. So here's where I've gotten so far. You can see I've got a scarf made just like when I was doing the strap hinge, preparing the scarf on the end of the bar for welding. I've made 2 steps there. I'm going to draw out that material I've left in the center. And that section will become what wraps around the pin. If I eyeballed this correctly, I should have just enough material when I draw that out that it's the correct length to wrap around the pin.
Hold that against the side of the anvil and we can see. Awesome.
And I'm drawing here how I would like it to look when it wraps around the pin.
all right, so there's a question over here. Why don't you just let the staple push it through? One answer is because it's just a little bit too hard for the staple to push through. And then what you'll do is you'll get that puckering on the back, which, right, so what's going to be kind of interesting is I'm not going to actually like countersink this or anything. There will be some that is exposed. And often what you see is the carpenter just takes a little chisel and cuts the spot in the wood, or it just gets nailed into it and pressed in. So it's not that big of an issue. Really, most of the answer is it's a little bit too difficult for the staple to do. So I'll punch this. Yeah, the second hole. Now I did file up the top of these staples. If this was going out and I had a little bit more time, I would have filed all the way around. These staples probably would have been a little bit thicker too. I've seen some really thin staples at the time. I just like the look of ones that are a little bit larger. I think I've been using cold roll 1/8 inch than hot roll 1/8 inch. I think that's maybe the difference, but these are still plenty good. And so the difference between hot and cold roll, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think cold roll is a little bit over tolerance. Is that true? Or it just has crisper corners? It's just sharper? Yeah, so your edges have more material. Cold roll has kind of that. Cold roll? Okay. Okay. I seem to like feel that cold roll is thicker, but it's probably just because of that illusion of the edge. I don't know why, but. Right, yeah.
Don't do what I just did.
What'd you do?
I just burned off the end.
Oh, nice.
And so if anyone ever feels bad about burning a bar, no, everyone does it.
All right, so I'll come over here to the vise and set it just a little bit past the thickness of these staples. I'll go ahead and test my fit. It's good enough. So I want to make sure that basically it's seated all the way around all four. One of these sides is a little bit high. It's not going to be much of an issue. For this, I'll just go ahead and rivet it. I would probably get in there with files and just be a little bit more diligent. We do have quite a bit of room there, so I might decide to file it down since we have quite a bit of space. I'll go ahead and open up this spring now. I'll just take my peen and hit the back. That'll open it up. That just did it ever so slightly. And then that's enough. I'm gonna want to curl the top of this so that it doesn't dig into that plate. I filed down, or I ground down the back of that spring a little bit from yesterday because I felt like it was a little thick. So now we can test our fit. I always will put my bottom one in first, and I'll get that anchored and riveted, and then I'll do the top. Because you can't put the bolt in without, or you can't put the top staple in without the bolt being in there, but you can put the bottom staple in. And I left my tenons long because you can do this sort of test fit if they're long. So, I mean, that's what you want to hear, a nice clank like that. There's a lot of space up there is what I was referring to. So I'll probably, I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it.
It is.
You think?
Yeah.
Well, I'll let Brodus be a one-man show for a second, and I'll go file those in the other room. What's that?
As long as somebody's doing some work.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe we'll get 50% more on the bid.
If you need me to strike, just call real loud.
All right. All right, so now I've got that drawn out. Back to where I was before, or just after where I was before. So I've got that straight. And I want it to be fairly straight through there.
Got it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Back on the swing.
cool. Thank you.
And before I came up, it was actually, I found it kind of funny. Hinges lately, but I haven't any pintles. I've just forged a bunch of straps. They don't yet have the posts that they need to get mounted to, so without the posts there, I'm not going to make the pintles, not knowing what the posts look like. So I was kind of out of practice making pintles, and I made up a bunch. And I actually did make that to be, is about 5/8 to go around a half-inch pin. Ruler here with me. This looks like it's a little bit more than a half. I think that's probably not right. Now that I only measured that because I was doing it over and over. I said, all right, this is starting to look the way I want it. What does how I want it to look actually measure up to? I had been doing it without measuring. I just wanted to know what that was for reference. That middle section is the collar. Well, the only place it's going to bear is under the barrel of the hinge. And the barrel of the hinge is only 1/4 of an inch thick. So if I make the bearing surface 1/2 inch wide, there's a 1/4 inch of circumference there that's not being utilized at all. Usually I make my pintles a little bit bigger than the hinge, but I think within ideal construction, and you do sometimes see it, where the pintle is the same. And again, kind of think about what Josh was talking about earlier with conserving material. If I can stretch that out, by stretching it out, I made it half the thickness of the bar that I started with. So that's going to be twice the length that it was before. So that material is conserved. I could just wrap it around without shouldering it at all, but that's a lot more material there that's not being used. I'm going to bend it. I find sometimes I have a tendency to bend right in the corner. I don't want that. So just watch it as it bends. Pull it, trying to make sure that that stays symmetrical. I'm going to start out by closing it all the way. Then I'm going to take my drift. Take shape there. So I'm gonna more, and then next heating I'm gonna set the pin in place, and then will be the welding heat, hopefully. I also would like to get a little bit on the pin. It's not super important, but I usually find it helps. It's a really fun weld to get right, so try to make it work as well as I can. So I'm making sure to get some flux inside the barrel where the surface of the pin and the collar are going to meet. I want to be real gentle. Right now, I want to get it seated. And I just want that surface to be flush there. See how that? Do you see what I say? That gap looks humongous right now. That looks like it's never going to close. It will be a little bit.
Like you're saying, there's actually not a huge amount of force in the pin itself.
Yeah.
The weight is all
Yeah.
around it.
Yeah, the weld is really to the collar so that they're together. But they're seeing kind of separate strains. The pin, it's going to have a racking strain on it this way. So if I were a mechanical joint, if I were threaded in there, holding against the racking strong, but the weld itself doesn't have to take a huge amount of strain. And looking at old ones, some of them have really, really bad welds. I mean, we've seen ones where the pin was just sitting in there loose. I'm going to try to do a good weld, but as we were talking about yesterday, you have this workman-like mentality. If I get it and it's ugly, but it's stuck and it's functional, it's all right. Where it's most likely to be ugly is on the bottom of it. It's down here. Never going to see that again. So now that I put together in the front for weld, I do have to be very conscious of the heating. Center and color on the other side. The heat together. It'll be the hardest thing to get hot because I put it in there cold. And it's in between these two other bars on the periphery that are much thinner than it. So I want to kind of turn back and forth in the fire, biasing one side and then biasing the other to try to bring it all up to an equal temperature. The other thing, tough one to, everyone does it a little bit different. When I pull it out of the fire to weld, you hit it just right. That if I hit it here first, it's maybe liable to weld on the sides but not the front. If I hit it just on the front first, it might, I have to kind of work it all around real quick right at the start. And in that first welding heat, I may not be trying to get too much done. I just want to get it starting to come together. But if I feel I can get a lot done, I will get a lot done. It all depends. The other thing I want to look for is sometimes that pin, as the collar heats up, it expands, so that pin can become loose and just fall through. That's actually part of why I put the pin in cold, because now since I put the pin in cold, the pin is going to expand to a greater degree than the collar around it, so it's going to remain tight, hopefully. So as you see, I'm not trying to get too much done. Starting to come together, right, and closing up that gap. I think I've got it welded pretty well around there. Did you see how I was coming from here, striking it there, trying to get it welded on all sides? I don't really want to hit it here yet. That if I hit here and this isn't welded, instead of welding here, it's just going to stretch that all out. And then once that's stretched out and welded, I come back to weld it, and it's not going to weld. It's just going to push itself back apart and ruin the weld. So you really want to focus on this outer periphery before it come back. And the front of it is always the most difficult spot to weld for me because you can't really hit that hard. It's only being hit against your hand. What was that? Well, they were using it in the 18th century, I can tell you that for sure. I haven't seen a real clear date when borax starts to be used, but it's a long time ago. I don't know. One thing I'm curious about is what comes first, being used as a laundry additive or being used as a flux. Because they're doing both in the 18th century. It's already got all the same uses we use it for. Huh. Interesting. All right, so now I'm going to start to bring together the actual shape of the pintle. It's not at a welding heat anymore, so I don't want to stress it, especially with mild. If it was wrought iron, maybe, but mild is not going to do it. So to actually form the nice sort of lollipop shape on the end, we've done this a couple times with these shouldering blows where you come in like that. In this case, I'm going to be both creating a shoulder and welding at the same time, which gets a little bit hairy. But it works. Let's see, is this? These will I do half inch. See if my magic. Oh, it's getting kind of warm.
All right, I got this good. I actually went a little too far, so I had to thin my bolt down a little bit. And then I used the power file just to trim up um, the, the tenons. So last thing I'll do is I'll actually deassemble all this again. I'm gonna punch my 4 holes for mounting, which I always forget to do, and I end up having to drill them. But I'll go ahead and punch them now. So I'll release this again.
Goes, but if there's going to be a welding heat that's going to throw off nasty sparks at everyone, this is going to be the one that does it.
If I could use like modern equipment for any of this, I would use a mill to make these tenons. That would be really nice. Just set it to a depth and come in. This is your first welding heat?
This is like my third.
Oh wow. Do you want a set hammer?
No. So there I'm starting to form the lollipop I want. I'm not worried about this. This will come later. I just want to get this area here squared away and made the way I want it. Also, remember what I was talking about, how that pin is going to see a lot of oxidation? That when I first started, it barely was even coming close to fitting in this, but now we're getting a lot closer. I probably will have to come back around and touch it with a hammer to make it fit, but I'd rather make it smaller than not have enough material there.
All right, so the round hole's the same thing. I'll just place it over where it ought to go. I don't want to deform that too much or it's going to change the look of the plate. Typically on this sort of hardware you see really, really small holes. They can be reamed out larger if need be. They're typically very close to the edges. Oh, that's not my plan. Another way of doing this is setting your plate right on top where you want it to go, and then knowing that spot, place your punch on top. That's easier to do if you're by an edge, but if you have to travel too far, it can be hard to discern. So for my bottom holes, I'm not going to place them right here at the corners because that's going to be at the bottom of the door. So you drill right into the end and you're going to split it out. So I'm actually going to put it above the staples.
The end of your reins, you have a small ball. Is that a period addition or?
Yeah, I've seen it on period tongs. There's actually a pair that came out of the archaeology near the armory that have little ball ends. So I wanted to try it. I don't think they're there for any particular reason. Maybe they help hold a tong clip on there, but I've never had that issue. I think they just thought it looked cool.
And is it from the original bar stock or was it?
Yeah, in this case it is from the original bar stock, for as small as these are. Now I'm getting to the point where I need it to fit in this bolster so I can start working it in another plane. So I'm going to have to. So you can see I've got that shape beginning to get really where I want it. Now I did it enough from the sides that I don't really want to form it much more there. What I want to do now is hit it from this plane. I want to try to get that end of the pin welded in, blended in with the collar around it to make it pretty, make it flat. See that there? So I'm going to start working on that.
Did you guys use wire brushes of any sort? Or no brushes very poorly?
Yeah, we don't see any evidence of brushes. We do keep a couple brushes around the shop for, like if you've got a borax and something to really scrub that off there. But we try to use brushes minimally. And I don't know where the brush went that was over here, but you can see well, there it is. You can see I'm doing all this work without a brush, all this welding. I just understand that so long as I keep turning it, I keep hitting it, I'll knock the scale off and it'll take the crud off with it. That while there might be crud right there, right now, as long as I make it sure that that crud isn't there when I'm planishing it, it'll be fine. Yeah. What you have to be conscious of is that if you've got a really crusty bar like I have right now, don't be pounding away on it, actually moving material, and then now you finish moving material and keep pounding away to planish it. You're just going to be pounding all that crud that's there on the anvil into the bar. So as you hit it one side, say if you got a big flat section like this, right? If it's all cruddy on this side and I hit it on that face, it's going to upset a little bit. That's going to knock everything off of it. Next thing I do is get that stuff off the anvil. I turn it down here. Now I've got pretty clean iron on a pretty clean anvil, and I can get a smooth surface that I didn't have to scrub it.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and set my tenons. You can see there's a very small amount that's protruding there. I filed them down, and then I just took a very fine file and made a chamfer all the way around, and it's just gonna let it be a little bit easier to peen over. So I'm gonna use my small riveting hammer. And I'm just gonna hit down here, set one side, then I'll go to the other side. I still need to do some more work there, but I really want to make sure that's set down nice and tight. Hopefully you get a little bit of suck down too. When thinking about hammer weight, there's a very interesting physics principle. So the larger your hammer, the more energy is forced farther down the bar. The smaller your hammer, the less energy is forced less far down the bar. It doesn't travel as much. So for like a rivet head like this, I really just want the top to move. I don't want right here to buckle. I remember when I used to like try to do things like this when I was first starting, I'd use my 3-pound hammer and everything would buckle, everything would get misshapen. I didn't know why, but it's because of the momentum, is that it just continues to travel. So real light, small hammer blows with a light hammer is gonna be what you want. Then once it's seated, you can do some heavier ones. And then I'll use the flat face just to crown it. There's probably just a little bit more head on here than I would prefer, but that's okay. I mean, it won't go anywhere. It just means you'd have to take a little bit more out of the door, but you're gonna have to take some off of it anyway. All right, so now do the top piece. If I have a thinner edge, I'll put it towards the top because that means your hole is tapered like this. And with that spring, that's the taper your bolt has as well. On those ones that pop up, it can be really hard to get that right, to get it nice and tight, but also have clearance to pop up. This one doesn't do that. Go ahead and start with the one that's seated a little bit firmer. Seat that one down a little bit better. This one I might have to rely on the suck in, so I'll have to hit it a little harder at the end. Before I did any of this work, I got the plate flat, and really, if anything, it had a little bit of a backwards arc to it. That way it'll suck down to the door versus the other way, it's just gonna rock. This will sometimes change it, and it's kind of a nightmare, so it's best to get it flat first. That way you know it can go flat, and then you just have to basically do the reverse of what you did to it versus trying to do everything.
All right, so I've got this seated now, got it drawn down to the point where it'll fit nicely in the bolster. So now that I've got it seated, I can go and weld it. Well, now I've got the pin essentially to my final dimension. I want to avoid oxidizing that, and I'm really trying to focus my welding here. So as I put it in the fire, I'm going to make sure that pin is sticking up. If anything, the pin should be sticking out of the fire. Let me get this off here.
All right, so that's why you do it. That noise. It's like the best thing in the world. I love it. So that's done now. I'll just polish up these staples. Eventually this will get just a nice kind of patina on it. But with those staples against the anvil, I probably should have done a better job cleaning that anvil off. But it'll, yeah, green sheep.
Very abrasive.
Yeah.
What's a colonial finish that you would put on there?
Just this. You could theoretically paint it. Something like a slide bolt you wouldn't want to paint in here because of that tolerance.
Anything to prevent rust?
Not really. So one, it's wrought iron. You know, wrought iron isn't going to rust as much. Two is it's anything exterior, you're probably going to paint it whatever the door or either the door or the building color. You could oil it. Oil's going to gum up though, so it's really just use is what you're seeing at the time is going to be best. So as usual, I'll start it over here. Y'all can pass it around. Yeah, so this would probably be, so typically at the time, it can go both ways, but typically doors are opening outward, right? No, that's wrong.
Well,
They're
if it's strap hinges, they open out.
Yeah, but something like, well, okay, it could be for either side. I'm thinking of the Capitol building at CW that has things like this.
Yeah, that would be on
Those
the
open
interior.
inside. Yeah, that'd be on the inside. Right, yeah. Well, so your nails would be clinched. So a clinched nail would be door frame. Your nail will drive all the way through. You'll make a small 90-degree bend, and then you'll bend it over. And so you basically in the door, your nail, say that's your nail head, is going to look like this. That way it can't be pulled out. Um, I'll bring that over here so y'all can see a little better. But so it would be. So often you'd see a slide bolt like this on double doors. So your first door would come in, you'd bolt it on the top and the bottom. Your second door would come in, and then your lock would lock into that. But you see them on, all sorts of things, basically. Oh yeah. What part? Oh, how it locks. So you often see them on double doors. So your first one's your anchor. Um, you'd have probably a slide bolt like that on the top and the bottom. It pushes in, and then your second door comes in. That's where your door lock is, and it locks into your anchor door. Oh, thank you.
All right. So now I've got that welded solid. This is probably the cleanest pintle I've made all week. So I can't see that pin now that I've welded it. And by using that bolster, it's making sure that the pin is perpendicular to the bearing surface. Now, one thing I didn't like there, this is just a consequence of working in a dirty fire, but it is manageable, is that when I fluxed it, all of the fly ash and coal dust stuck in the flux. And if you saw it was sparking real bad when I pulled it out of the fire, I find that if you have that fly ash stuck in the flux, it will kind of cause the metal to burn as you pull it out of the fire. If it's not got anything stuck to it, it won't burn as bad as if they're stuck there on the surface. So if you're going to weld and you pull it out of the fire and there's gunk on the surfaces you're welding, it's not going to weld. It's not going to happen. Don't let that happen. So for a long time, my philosophy was that if you have sparks in the fire and you're going to weld, you should sparks up so that the air isn't hitting that welding surface. The problem with doing it this way is that all that ash sits on top, and then it's gummy. So I take it to going sparks down. That way when I pull it out of the fire, this face might be all ugly, but the other side that I need to weld is good and clean. When I put them together, it'll weld. So kind of what I was doing here was along those lines, that where I really wanted it to weld was on that bottom face there where the pin is. I wanted to blend that seam in. And I knew that this fire wasn't going to be doing me any favors. So I made sure that was the part that was down in the fire. That part was going to be clean. Even if it was really dirty up top, it was clean down there.
All right, so I just made my, oh man, we're not gonna find that. I just made my pin stock, but I just dropped it. Right?
Borax.
There it is.
Not really complicated. I've used other fluxes and they do work good. That it's not snake oil. It's like Iron Mountain. Iron Mountain really works. It does a really good job. But if you can learn how to do it with borax, it just makes Iron Mountain that much more powerful for you when you do use it. I think Josh was talking a bit about that yesterday. Learning how to really weld with the bare minimum gives you a really good foundation. And I mean, if you really want to go nuts, learn how to weld without flux. It can be done. That's what they do over in Britain. It's not easy, but it can be done. If you learn how to weld without flux, it means that you have a really, really good control over your fire. I wouldn't do it in this fire, but learning how to fine-tune your fire that well is really valuable.
All right, so I just made my pin stock there. I'm actually going to punch the rest of these holes before I do that. But I just made out a little piece of 3/8 square. You know, you saw how quickly I could draw that out. That's because I didn't take a lot of material. I took probably a little less than a cube. I mean, when you're doing that, you're just constantly keeping the piece hot. You know, you put more friction in the bar, so it's real easy to taper stuff like that out. Yeah.
Did you say square, Josh?
Yeah, I made a 3/8 square. Oh, this is now like 1/8 round.
Oh,
But I made it out of that bar.
okay.
Yeah.
I misunderstood. I thought you were putting the square pin in there.
No.
Okay.
That's for if you don't want people to visit you. Alright, so same exact thing. I'll put 3 holes in each of these. I'm going to reference that real fast just so I know where I ought to put these. Wasn't super in line. You could hear it, you could feel it.
I'm just trying to clean up some of that crud from that really gross welding heat. It was a great welding heat, but it screwed up my bearing surface. But I can fix it. Now, another thing I want to mention while I'm doing this, something I struggled with a lot when I was first learning to do these, is when you're not good at doing all that welding and getting it welded nicely all around the periphery, you kind of have a tendency to work it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and keep going around and around and around and around. What's wild is you'll see the pin migrate to the front of the bar as you do that. That you draw all that material from the front down back behind the pin, and the pin isn't centered anymore. So you really kind of have one shot to get it right, and you don't want to fuss with it too much. If you fuss with it much, that pin is going to start migrating. But if you can get it right from the beginning, then that pin's going to be right where you left it, right in the center. That's a challenging thing to get right. Very frustrating. It's wild to see the pin move to the front. You wouldn't think it would move around in that piece, but it can. Well, you can't hit on the side that you need to hit it, get it to move back. At the side you need to hit is inside of the shank here. That's where you need to hit. I can't hit it there. The only place you can hit it is on the front, so that's why it migrates forward. You gotta hit it from the back. It doesn't work. Because what Josh was saying earlier about using a light hammer versus a heavy hammer and how the force goes through the bar, well, here, I'm right here near the pin, so the force goes through that really, really easy. Over here, even if I hit it from the end of the bar there, my force has to go all the way through the bar. So even there, it's still going to actually be working more here on the side that's on the anvil than the side I'm trying to hit.
All right, 2 holes left.
Another thing that's easy to make happen when you're doing this is to bias towards the front of it and make it tapered. I don't want that to happen, so I'm trying to hit over there. There's also want to to the rest of it. I want that pin perpendicular. Now it's also getting to the point where I can no longer work it on the bar. I'm going to be forced to start working it here. So the next heat, I'm going to cut it off and draw out the shank. You'll notice I still haven't even addressed the other half of that weld. I've just left it open. The reason I do that is that I have to draw out that other end anyway into a big taper. I might as well draw it out at a welding heat so I can hit as hard as I can and make the most material move. If I'm drawing it out at a welding heat, I might as well weld that thing shut while I'm at it. So you can double up on all the jobs at once. So if I'm making a bottom pintle that goes at the bottom of the door where it's short, I can draw that out and weld it in one heat.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start riveting this. I'll just hover it in the hole and work from either side. One of my sides kind of rolled over, so let's see if I can't just do a little bit of file work to halt that any further. I think it was a little long on that side. Yeah. Might be hard to get in here. Well, I'll just try to hide it with the hammering. Y'all see what I mean.
This welding heat's also going to throw some sparks. I'm going to try to push them that way. See if I can put them there. I mean, if anyone wants a spark job, I can just actually remember.
So one time, okay, do y'all know what tow is? Is it TOW? It's like stuff that's it's grass that's real fine that takes a light super easily, and we use it at CW for starting our fires. So we'll flint and steel the char cloth to some tow or to some wood shavings, whatever. Oh, it had a big bundle of tow on the on one of the workbenches. It was behind me. And I took a crispy welding heat and just started going at it. Well, it caught the toe on the bench on fire because it's so easy to light. And it's just this huge flame, and all the guests start like like gasping, and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. And I turn around, and there was, the toe on fire, and it's such a low burning heat wise. And so I just walked over the bench and I grabbed it and I threw it on the ground while it was burning, and I just walked off and kept working. I thought, man, that had to look so cool.
So I got it most of the way drawn out and welded. I can see most of the seam, but that's all going to be driven into a block of wood. So if I can see the seam, that's not a problem. I could flux it again and keep working and try to blend that seam in, but I don't want to be burning everyone with sparks all day long. So I'm just going to work this at a high temperature, not flux it. Enough flux in the fire anyway.
That was skeevy. I just cut it with the file and then sheared it off.
We'll go
All
back
right,
to
so
the.
that's done here. I'll pass that around. I'll gussy it up a little bit more before the silent auction, but that's finished too. All right, so I'm done with my lift here. We now need something for that to catch into. So I'll go ahead and start shaping that. There's some really cool features, but basically most of them just look like a nail that has kind of a sharp step in it for that to catch into, and then a ramp for it to slide in. So I'll make that style first, and then I think we'll have plenty of time. Does anyone have the time on them? 11 o'clock. So we have an hour? Yeah. Okay. I'll do another style probably that's I'm not as good at, so I want to make sure that I get one done. But it's kind of cool. It has a drive shank, and then it bends around, and there's a little pad foot that then you put another nail in. I don't know if that's necessary, but they're kind of cool.
So now that I'm getting this panel really close to finish, instead of using the bolster, I'm going to use the hinge. I don't want to start with the hinge as a bolster. That's just not going to work well. The hinge isn't suited for it. I don't want to beat the snot out of the hinge. But ultimately, this pinto's friend is this hinge. So if I can work them together as a unit, I can make sure that they work well together. And if I'm really having problems, not only can I work the pintle and the hinge, but I can work the hinge around the pintle. They can both be worked one on the other. turning it
Yeah.
and working it.
Would this be more like a lightweight door latch?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This is your $9.99 thumb latch from China at the time. That's real cheap. You know, basically the slide bolt is just like a step up from your $9.99 slide bolt. I mean, it's a pretty back plate. It's got that knob on the end, but it's just the same as a slide bolt like this. You know, this is your combined $15.99 set here. You know, that type of thing. So I think just in modern terms, it's real cheap stuff.
I just wondered if it's like
You probably have it on an interior door, typically stuff like that. I mean, you see them on exterior doors as well. I'm not sure. So it's being priced by weight at the time. English ironwork imported in Williamsburg is selling for about 6 pence a pound, and then James Anderson in a local shop is selling iron for 9 pence a pound. So if you buy a door handle at the store, you're getting 33% off, basically. It's cheaper, a good bit to buy imported stuff.
To put some perspective, because always child folks want to know how much did it cost, how many US dollars is this thing worth. It doesn't really compute. I did find once someone put together a conversion computer for 18th century British currency to modern currency. There's about 5 different options of different ways you can convert it. Each different option gives you a different number. So, how are you measuring it? It doesn't really compute well. Now, what we can say is that if, say, you're a journeyman blacksmith, you're earning a living, you're being paid for your work. A journeyman blacksmith around where we are in the 18th century can expect to earn between 3 and 4 shillings a day, and there's 12 pence to a shilling. So the ironwork sold at 6 pence per pound imported from England. You earn 4 shillings a day, 12 pence to a shilling. That's cheap. We use shillings. We're British.
You
What
can't really
language
give
are
an
you speaking?
accurate. You can't give an accurate number, but you can give like reasonable estimates. So like,
What do you earn in a day's wage today? Right? Yeah. Yeah. So how much do you earn in a day's wage today? Say that was 4 shillings then. Right? Another one I recently saw was taverns. They were such an important amenity that the taverns had a set cost for the fare of the tavern. To buy a hot dinner with a beer, the ordinary meal, that cost a shilling and 6 pence. So consider say you buy a 3-pound axe from England, right? That's a shilling and 6 pence for a 3-pound axe. Your dinner is also a shilling and 6 pence.
yeah, it's just kind of, you have to estimate it. There's a list that I saw at one point. I can't remember everything, but like I think it's like 3 pounds of bacon on a day's wage. It's 6 to 9 pounds of iron that a workman could buy with a day's wage. So you kind of have to think about it in those terms, just because costs of living is so different of like what people are actually spending on.
For instance, in the modern day, food has never been cheaper. So we pay barely anything for our food. They were paying a lot for their food. On the other hand, today, housing is very expensive. Then, housing was considerably cheaper. Another one is clothing. Today, we don't think much of clothing. Then, clothing is a big part of your budget. So much has changed about how we value every part of our day-to-day lives. It just doesn't compute well. By what metric are you measuring it?
All right, so you can see the shape starting to take form. I'll come in with a file and I'll clean that corner up real nice and tight. You have a little bit of a ramp there and then hammering that point out.
So I didn't have to do it on this one, but another thing I want to mention is if things are cattywampus on this, you can use the hinge like a bending fork. So you can say, set the pintle in your vise and use the hinge to make the adjustments that you need to make depending on which leg needs adjusting. The last thing I'll do on this one is I'll show you how you cut barbs into it. Though I will need a sharp hot cut. Sharp handled hot cut, if anyone's got one.
Back to that discussion of valuations, if a workshop like the Anderson shop is large enough to have a workforce, the workers there, do they generally have a set wage, daily salary, or did it change on, say, production piece of work? How does that variable come into the work person's life?
For small blacksmith shops, it seems like they're paying their journeymen by the day. That work is so inconsistent that you can't guarantee on having a consistent production. So if you paid the workmen by the piece, your workmen may not be able to afford to feed themselves if you get a strange order that you can't accomplish the same rate that a production worker should be able to accomplish it. So as I think a master of the shop, you have to sort of look at your jobs and figure out which jobs are you going to. This one. Thank you. Which jobs are going to be big money makers and which aren't going to make you enough money, but you're still going to take on. Maybe that job is going to help you get 10 other jobs. So you're going to take on that inefficient job. You have to kind of gamble where are your losses. And just to keep your journeymen employed, you're going to have to continue to pay them by the day, even if they're not doing the most productive work. Now in large-scale manufacturing, like the smiths who are making Suffolk latches, nails, they're being paid by the piece. They have a quota they have to meet. They get paid depending on how much they make. And they're so consistent in their manufacture that they can guarantee they can meet that quota. Now the other thing that I always remind folks, when folks ask me how much does a blacksmith earn, how well off was a blacksmith? Well, in the shop where I work in the 18th century, there was every kind of labor you can imagine. You have the master of the shop, he's a blacksmith. You have journeymen, they're blacksmiths, they're being paid. You have apprentices who are indentured, exchanging labor for education. There are indentured convicts paying off debt by working there. There are prisoners working there. During the war, there are soldiers working there. And there's enslaved workmen working there. So there's going to be a very different sort of workforce than what we're familiar with today. We're managing all of these different laborers who are being compensated differently or not being compensated. It's really a mixed basket there.
What about relative to other trades? Or is it still too?
We find that compared to other skilled trades, it usually tends to be pretty similar. So carpenters, blacksmiths, stonemasons, they can be in a similar ballpark. We find that the biggest difference comes from competition. So say the level of entry to setting up a blacksmith shop, there's so much infrastructure you need to set up a blacksmith shop. It's a very high level of entry. There's going to be fewer blacksmiths, less competition, you can charge more for your work. On the other hand, say setting up a tailor shop, you need barely any infrastructure at all. So there's going to be a lot more tailors, a lot more competition. Generally speaking, they're not going to be earning as much. And we find that the blacksmiths, or the smiths in general, who are paid the best, are the smiths who make the largest, heaviest things. Anchor smiths make the most. And I think part of that comes down to charging per the pound. That if you can turn out several thousand pounds of iron on just a couple days' work, well, that's a lot of incoming profit. Whereas if you're making really light little things, you've got to work really hard to make a lot of them to make much profit. So here I'm going to cut some barbs into this. Will help the pintle hold better. It's pretty slick how they're put in. So I'm just going to take the chisel and hold it at an angle on the bar and have Josh strike it.
So Brodus is going to do these on all four corners. You sometimes see these on two, but the The issue the carpenters have noticed is if you only do it on 2, it's way easier for the blacksmith, because then you don't have to move your hand over, bend your wrist. Is it corkscrews in the hole when they go to set it. So if you do them equally, then it just goes straight.
That pintle is all finished up there. Pull this off and pass it around. I wouldn't. Here, where do we want to start? Over here? Start all the way over here. There you guys go. I'm not fond of cutting the barbs in cold. I prefer to do them hot. I find if it's light enough to where you'd want barbs that small, it usually doesn't need barbs. I have had times where people requested barbs be put in. So say making a little staple for a latch, I put barbs in those when requested. In that case, I put them in cold because it was so small. But I don't think that really needed those. The customer just thought he wanted those, so he's my customer, I'm not going to tell him no. Those are made.
So I illustrated here how the Suffolk latch internal hardware actually works. I don't know where I put the actual thing, but I mean, you get the picture here. That's your latch that the actual thumber strikes. So this piece here is illustrated right there. That hovers on the bottom. When you lift that up, it lifts your lever. Your catch is right there in the door frame, so that lifts it from your hook. And then that's your staple in the center. And your staple needs to be positioned very carefully. It's going to have to set basically your the height of your latch as it's in the catch. That way, as the latch comes over, it's not too far down and it just hits your ramp. It actually is just above it, and it can slide over and automatically close. So the positioning of that is pretty important. Often these are clinched over as well, because that's actually very easy for it to pull out. So that's just what this illustration is over here. Say it again. It's probably the carpenter or whoever's building it. Again, this would be hardware that's imported from England most typically, so that guy's not making the trip across the Atlantic. I haven't installed a whole lot of these. I've installed maybe a half dozen of these doors. I kind of think it's a pain, so I'm glad that the blacksmith doesn't install them often, but it's just a lot of tedious work. You want to get everything lined up, get the hinges right as well. So, well, we've got, probably 45 minutes. Is there anything anybody wants to see that we haven't done? Maybe not a full project, but
Make an anchor?
Make an anchor? You probably could. I think somebody asked about shutter dogs. I can go ahead and start a forging on that. I probably won't completely finish. So historically, the term dog just refers to something that holds another thing. An andiron, another name is fire dog. It holds fire. So a shutter dog is something that holds shutters. You've got log dogs, you have bench dogs, you have all sorts of things like that. You have dog nails. So a shutter dog just holds a shutter in the open position, so it doesn't swing shut with the breeze. So I'll start from this bar 1/4 by 1. again, I'll finish this stuff during the lunch hour and put it in the auction hopefully before that's closed, or y'all can bid on it by spec. That works too. DOG dog. Yeah.
Someone last night asked me if when my back is turned to the forge, if I can tell something is burning. There's nothing that indicated that it was burning. The timer in my head was going off. It's burning.
So we'll start by drawing a taper. That's a pretty gnarly taper there. But we'll forge it out. For a shutter dog, you'll have one section on top that will keep the shutter from blowing open. We actually have a counterweight, which is most often a scroll piece. I think I lost my mic. And then what that counterweight will do is if somebody walks by and brushes it, it's just going to close shut automatically. So it's a nice.
Everybody, in about 15 minutes, he'll be ready for orders.
Josh mentioned this term dog, shutter dog, fire dog, log dog. I'm actually making dog nails as it would so happen. Folks often ask, well, why are all the nails back in the concentric square? And why do the holes in the hinges, why are they round if you put square nails in them? You don't, you put round nails in them. They make round nails. So specifically, the nails suited for mounting strap hinges are called dog nails. I don't know why they call them dog nails, but they've got a round shank, a square point, a round head. So this is a decent one. I'll pass this one around. So this is a dog nail. This is what will be used to mount that hinge. Now an interesting thing is oftentimes they're not all mounted with nails. There's a system to it. And what you usually see is that the very first hole, rather than being filled by a nail, is filled by a rivet. It's riveted through the door. So you put the big head of the rivet that you've made like a nail on the inside against the wood, and then through the door you have the rivet head, which is peened over in the first hole of the hinge here. Because that takes the most strain of anywhere on the door. And I mean, you've probably seen doors where they were pried against and that one peels out. That rivet is much stronger, so the first one's a rivet. The next ones down will be dog nails. So we've seen original hinges that are mounted that way, and reading the record books of a blacksmith shop, you start to notice when someone is ordering a kit for hanging a door, that you'll see someone orders 2 straps, 2 hooks. The pintles were called hooks. I didn't mention that yet. Pintle is actually a more modern term. Everyone knows them as pintles, but in the period they're called hooks. So hooks and hinges, 2 hooks, 2 hinges, 2 rivets, and 6 dog nails. That's the full kit for the strap hinges there. This is a sort of spot where the interdisciplinary research of both being a historian looking at the paperwork, but also being a technician doing the work. If you're just doing paperwork, you don't realize that the hooks and hinges are a unit, and the 2 rivets and the 6 dog nails are part of that unit as well. Otherwise, you're just saying, oh, someone's ordering a bunch of nails at the same time they're ordering hinges. But it's actually one order, one block. And you see a couple things like that. Another one, you see sort of a wheelbarrow kit, that someone has a wheel tired, 2 gudgeons, and 2 pins made. The gudgeons are kind of like little hinges that the wheelbarrow wheel turns on. So you see these little kits that start showing up on the pattern on the record books. I think they usually are. You want the rivet to fit tight into the hole that's in the hinge, so whatever you punched in the hinge is what the rivet has to be. I think it would make sense that the same tool I use to make the nails is the tool I use to make the rivet with. The only difference with the rivet is you just don't put a point on the end. Just leave it as a cylinder all the way out. Iron through here. That piece there is steel, welded on, just a little cap. That's a real booger to weld on, too.
I've heard a lot of debate over the years about the design of a nail header. Is that something you can speak to a little bit?
Yeah. Let me make a nail and I'll talk about it. So, like anything, there's no one absolute way to do anything. But with some things, there's a way that seems like it's real close to being the best way to do it. And with nail making, it being such a specialized trade, and those workmen being paid so little for their work, and then making those nails so quick, I think they figured it out. So I would just take those old nailers' word for it and use their design tools. They had it right. With the nail header, one very important detail I see a lot of folks do is to crown the top of it here. I see a lot of people make them completely flat, but this little pedestal with the round top is really important, because as I'm heading the nail, I'm coming down with these angled strikes. If it's flat, like the face of the anvil, I'm just going to strike the anvil. So if you're forging a taper, as soon as you learn how to forge a taper, everyone tells you put it at the edge of the anvil so you don't hit the anvil. Well, it's the same doing the nail head. You're forging a taper. So I want to put the nail head at the edge of my anvil for forging the nail head. So I don't want it to be in the middle of a big face. I want it to be on a little pedestal so I can get that taper. I think forging that taper is also pretty important. You don't just want a flat head. If you forge it straight down in a flat head, it's really difficult for it to go down straight, cylinder, completely even centered on the bar. That naturally it wants to push off to one side or the other and you can't really steer it. Where if I'm doing an angled, I can steer it. I can see that, oh, it's biasing towards that way. I'm going to knock it that way and then knock it this way. By working at an angle, I'm driving everything towards the center. So it's going to stay centered. So I want the angle is important, the dome there is important, the height is important. The other thing that I hear debate on is whether the hole should be tapered this way or that way. This is the way I think most of them should be. Not saying all of them. There might be some niche situations like, say, making horseshoe nails where you want to taper the other way. But for most nails, you want to taper this way. That way, as you are heading the nail, the only point where that nail head is contacting is right under the head of the nail. Otherwise, like how a drill chuck mounts into a drill press with a Morse taper, if you do it the other way, you're forming an exact taper fit, and you're going to have a hell of a time getting the nail out of the nail header. But if it's the other way, it's the opposite. It's only touching in one spot. It's going to have a lot easier of a time being removed from the header. The last detail I'll mention in making the nail, this doesn't really relate to the header, but actually the process of making the nail. There's one really important step I see a lot of people miss in nail making. That's a shoulder. A lot of people just make taper and cut it in half. But when you do that, you're losing your control of where on the taper the head starts. Are you going to forge your taper to a precise, exact taper every single time? Probably not. Is it going to bite exactly the same on that taper every single time? Probably not. So if I forge a shoulder, well, now I say that's where the head starts, that's where the shank stops. There, now I can control it. I can make sure that my nails are that long. I can control how much material is going to become in the head of the nail, and now I can make sure all of my shapes are exactly how I want them. So that little step is very important.
You know, I never thought about the Morse taper thing, but like you would literally be forging a Morse taper into a Morse tapered hole.
I'll try to show that this next couple of heats. Because it's already so loosey-goosey, it's going to move around on you if you have to steer it anyway. Well, if I forge a two-sided set down rather than a four-sided set down, that's a lot quicker for me. So that's going to help me speed up my work. I can get to the heading sooner. I do have to steer it. A lot of it is muscle memory and really subtle. I hit a little harder here, I hit a little less hard there. But also can be controlled in how you cut it. Usually the way I like to cut it is if I forge my two shoulders on these two sides, I like to cut it from these two sides. That way that cut is coming off bias to one side. It's putting a little more material to that side where I haven't shouldered it, where the point of the cut is. So that's going to help offset it as well. The one thing with these dog nails is you got to forge the things round. That's a hassle. And I have seen hinges that have square holes and have square nails in them. Just most of them have round holes and round nails.
All right, so for this shutter dog, I just basically made 2 isolations on one side of the bar. I went ahead and pulled the taper and did a courtesy bend just so I could hold them with these tongs. I got a twist in there, so I'll have to work that out. Made my preform by making a near-sided set down, and now I'm spreading that out, peening it. Probably at this point, I'll go ahead and just flatten that. I'll want a nice, even taper from the boss to the edges all the way out. Again, drawing this material down to the lightest it can be will be the cheapest for the manufacturer, who also has to be competitive in a very competitive English industry. So the cheaper I can make it, the more I can sell, the more money I'll make. I think Brodus may have mentioned earlier, I don't know if he did, but people are being paid by piecework. So, you know, however you make it a day, or, you know, objects you make in a day versus the rate you get. So efficiency, again, that's going to be your stressor in that market. Anybody here economists? I know there's a finance guy over here. So you study Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. So Adam Smith is an 18th century economist, and what he's looking at is, why is English industry better than a lot of countries? Why can they crank things out quicker and cheaper than others? And he writes a really long book, and a lot of that it talks about specialization of labor. So, you know, a nailsmith only making nails can make much more than just a blacksmith making nails one day, hinges the next, locks the day after. And he provides really interesting metrics, which is really rare from this time period. But he examines 3 different smithing shops. The first is a general blacksmith, like the James Anderson shop. And he asked that blacksmith, make nails all day long, we'll see how many you make at the end. And he made 100 poor quality nails in one day, which is really bad. He goes to a second shop, which is more acquainted with nail making. They do it more regularly, but still a general smith. That guy made about 500 nails in a given day. The last smith he went to was a nailsmith. This guy apprenticed for 7 years in this trade, had just finished his apprenticeship. And he made 2,300 nails in a day. And that's where we get that number, about 2,000-ish. So, you know, that really shows you the strength of specialization. I find that my skills improve the most when I have to make a dozen of something. And I'll do it by basically batch work. I'll put a dozen pieces in. I'll do the first step a dozen times. By that 12th time, man, you're locked in. You're good to go. And then you just keep going down that list or those steps, and you get really good by the end. So as you practice your work, that's, you know, something I'd recommend is make a lot of one thing just over and over again. That repetition will serve you well.
Depends on the purpose. So the dog nails for hinges, they're round. Otherwise, they're square.
Or
3 times as
rectangle
long
mostly.
to make a circle than it does to make a square. So if I can avoid it, I'm not going to make a circle.
Most common nails are going to be rectangular shaped.
That was the other thing. They're not actually square, they're rectangles. And the rod, when they started with nail rod, wasn't a square. Nail rod was slit from plate. It's slit rod. So it's actually a slight parallelogram, or what is that shape? Trapezoid. It's a slight trapezoid. Slightly smaller on one side, slightly longer on the others from being slit. It's a slight rectangle. So when they make nails from it, they make slightly rectangular shanks, and the heads are also slightly oblong. They're not circular. Cut nails are different.
Yeah, so cut nails, you would take a wide sheet.
Sorry.
Pretend this piece of wood is like 3/16 by 2, so 3/16 by 3. So cut nails, you would feed it into the machine, and the machine's gonna shear a triangle section. So you have your taper. Tapers in one direction. The other side is just your 3/16 all the way down. Sometimes that would then be placed. Early on, you would hand head it. Later, a machine would do all of that. Now, the problem is, if you feed that, you make your triangle, you feed your next one, then you have to bump out that way, do your next one, and you're just gonna keep going until now you're back straight. So it would be fed, flipped, fed, flip, fed, flip. And that would be machine operated. So it'd be all mechanical eventually, doing that type of work. What's that? I haven't really seen images of a
What's the question?
where they drop hammers, or what does the cut nail machine look like? I mean, I've seen that Canadian one, but that's a
Look at the big
like
sort
the
of
80s.
eccentric cam.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the first patent for a cut nail machine comes out in 1795. A man named Jacob Perkins in Massachusetts. It's going to be later. Yeah, it could be. I'm not quite sure. Another problem with cut nails early on is, notice the grain in this. Your grain is going across your nail. So that actually means your nail is relatively brittle. For things like clinching door hardware and horseshoeing, you can't use cut nails for a while until they fix the grain issue. So I used to work at a historic site in Texas interpreting 805. And when you look at the business ledger books, they're selling both wrought and cut nails. And typically wrought nails are right next to selling horseshoes. So those are pretty explicitly linked for a very long time. Hand wrought nails, because they're tougher, they're not going to break and lame the horse in the hoof.
I actually found a reference to cut nails and wrought nails together in the last place I expected. I was reading Moby Dick, published in the 1860s. Well, Herman Melville, in his writing, is making an analogy about the quality of a good ship's captain and how, like a carpenter, the ship's captain will separate the good sailors from the bad sailors, like a carpenter separates his cut nails from his wrought nails. That those wrought nails, they can be clinched fast and you can trust them, whereas the cut nails you can't. But even by that point, that late, when he was writing Moby Dick, they still were familiar with the wrought nails and the advantage that the wrought nails had over cut nails.
So the question brought us is nail making a cottage industry in England?
I think cottage industry is kind of a contentious term. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no.
Sorry.
So there's a film online. I couldn't tell you the name of how to find it. That's the problem with all these great things. Is the name of it's in a different language, and I don't know what it says. There's a film of nail makers in Belgium in the early 20th century making nails still by hand. They're making shoe nails, hobnails for hiking boots. That's one of the last vestiges of handmade nails is for those. They're such an odd shape that you can't really make them by machine. And in this film, they visit both a larger nailery where they're making nails as an industrial profession. In there they have a large forge with several workmen all gathered around the forge, all working together, making nails. So is that a cottage industry? I wouldn't say so. That's an industrial shop where there's many employees coming together to work at a single facility. That's not cottage. Then they go and they visit another shop that's behind some fellow's house and it's just him and his little tiny fire making nails by himself. That's cottage industry. So nails are coming both from industrial shops and from cottage shops.
The notion of I'm gonna make nails in my home hearth over the winter is, I think, very wrong. A lot of that comes from who wrote Diary of an Early American Boy?
Eric Sloan.
Eric Sloan. Eric Sloan has some rather dubious historical information at best. So a lot of stuff, there's just so many myths and stuff like that. You're not going to find people on the frontier forging nails out of their fireplace.
What I'll say is Eric Sloan was a really great tool collector. He did a fantastic job collecting tools. He was not a great historian. He really liked telling a story, collecting tools and making a story around these tools. But he didn't really do hard research into the actual history of the things that he so much enjoyed. So he's a mixed bag. That you can't say he was bad, but he also created a lot of myths. And farmers making nails in their hearths, that's a myth that he created. I don't see any evidence for that.
He did have nice drawings. That's funny because like half of that, Diary of an Early American Boy is about the weather. I didn't know he was a weatherman. So a cool trick, I can use these actually, is holding flat bar with box jaw tongs is like the best grip you can get on flat bars. 3 points of contact, it's not gonna budge. I first saw that when I came to CW and just thought, where has that been all my life?
What is, can you explain a little bit the shouldering of the nail? I mean, you're not talking about the parent stock and then tapering. You're actually putting a little shoulder in.
Let me draw it.
I think maybe some kids, I'm not clear. I know what a shoulder is, but I don't know where you're doing it in the nail.
So there's kind of a couple of stages of making a nail. I'll draw them out. The first, pointing the bar. That's going to establish the point. Depending on the nail, that step of pointing it might come earlier, might come later in the process. For most nails, that's the first thing you do is you put a point on. The thing you can see me doing. What?
It's not centered on the bar?
Usually no. I'm not really worried about that yet. The way that I'm making these, I have to go from a big 3/8 down to something a lot smaller. I'm doing a lot of really rough work on the horn before I start coming to the face. So my bar looks, kind of like that. Then I come to the face, and I'm going to begin shouldering it. So the shoulder is wherever I want the shank to start and the nail head to start. Delineation between the two of them. So let's say I want the nail to be yay long. The shoulder has to be there, like that. And I'll make it a two-sided shoulder. So you're looking at the bar, front on, square bar. The material for the nail will be in one corner, like that. There's a little point of the nail there, like that. Another thing is that nails aren't always a continuous taper all the way down. Sometimes the taper that I'm looking for is really almost parallel for most of it, and then tapers towards the end of it. And sometimes it's not the same on both sides. Sometimes it's pretty straight down one side, and pretty tapered down the other. There's a lot of different sorts of nails for different purposes, different ways you'll construct them. With this step, the next thing I'm going to do is cut it there, like that. And as I was saying, I prefer to cut it biased to the same way that I shouldered it. So now I've got more material right here that as I head it, that material is going to push over to one side. So in the heading, I'll draw a nail header here. There's the nail header. There's the hole inside the nail header. There's the shank of the nail going down there. You got the shoulder sitting like that, right? So as I strike it, usually I think I first strike this side, create a sort of big facet there, there's a lot of material sort of like that. So now it's centered. Now I can start coming in from all sides and get the nail head I want on there.
Thank you. I mean, when I first started the metal museum a long time ago, we made nail bleed. I never saw that. Man,
Yeah, it's a really crucial step, and it doesn't look like much, but it does so much for the control over how the nail is constructed.
I'll say virtually like every nail I've seen away from CW, the heads are way too thick and too big. You really want super thin edges. You want that to bite in the wood. And then you can see the pitch that Brodus illustrated. I mean, I make nails way too flat. I keep trying to make mine steeper, but generally at the time you see very steep pitches.
And so wherever that nail was that got passed around, you can see it's really pointed.
That's kind of neat. Thanks.
Don't launch that at someone.
Yeah. All right, so that's my basically preform. This is really rough, so don't judge me on this. I probably would have used 1/4 by 3/4 on this. That's a super wide. You don't need nearly that wide of a boss, and it's just kind of thick all the way around. But I'll go ahead and scroll it up so you guys can see it. I'll start with this end here. Scrolling is one of my favorite techniques. Once you realize what you're doing with scrolling, it's actually super intuitive. Think about it like this. You're gonna kink the bar, and then you're gonna unkink the bar. Basically what you'll do is you want a real nice, tight, progressive spiral. You can see right here I have a flat spot in my illustration. So if I wanted to fix that, I would heat up right there. I would set this, well, because it's already tight, let's pretend I haven't made that yet. Let's say my bar goes like this. I'm gonna support this on the anvil, and I'm gonna strike right here, my two high spots that are on either side, bookending my flat spot. That's then gonna pull that spot in tighter, and that's actually gonna make this spot, my kink, a little bit shallower. It'll open it up very slightly. One thing to remember when you're doing this is that if you're out here, this bar still has inertia if it's hot. Or it has inertia in general, but if it's hot, that inertia, it might stick in the same spot. So you have to be aware that you're gonna have to kind of do it progressively and continue to work it. You have to get it the same temperature all the way around. That's gonna be a big thing. You don't want a hot spot or a cool spot. And then lastly, you just want to keep moving the bar. You don't want to hit the same spot twice, or it's going to, you're going to generate that flat spot inadvertently. So I'll brush this over the edge. I really want to make sure I get that tip right, because once it's rolled up, there's not a good way of fixing that. You can come in here too and hit like that. So you can see I've got a flat spot right there, right where my illustration was. So I'm going to put one end on the anvil and strike there. Just kind of bring it in. And you can see that, close that up. You'll notice as I'm hitting it, I'm also pulling my left hand up, and I'm kind of basically finding center with my two faces. You know, this hand is going to adjust the face of the anvil. This hand will adjust the face of my tongue. So now I'll heat it a little bit farther back and keep going from there. Scrolling, like the bending of the Suffolk latch, is easiest to do if you do it one consistent, not in one heat, but one heat in each section. I find if I go back and try to tweak it with scrolling pliers, which sometimes is necessary, sometimes it's better just open it back up, straighten it out, and do it again. If you can do it continuously, it makes a nice smooth form. All right, so this is where I make a kink. So I'm taking material that's kinked right there, right? It's the same thing now. I'm going to place that on the edge of the anvil, and just past that kink is now where I want my bend to be. So I'm taking material, taking a bite, rounding that, taking a bite, rounding that. I find that I really like to scroll by hand and not with a jig. It makes it a real lively, and it's just you can get some really nice shapes that way. If I was going to do 500 of these for a gate, I'm absolutely doing them on a jig. I'm not going to do all this by hand. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do. I think it's best to learn and to keep in practice doing them by hand. You know, if I have a small job, I'll definitely do them by hand just for the sake of continuing to keep that skill. You can see I'm not trying to do anything too fast. I'm not doing a whole lot of it at any one time. I'm just very progressively trying to tweak this. There's a historic home near Williamsburg. It's about an hour away. It's called Westover. Some of us were talking about that the other day. And Westover, the house is neat. It's early 18th century house. What's really cool, and why all the blacksmiths go to take a pilgrimage there, is it has original gates from 1713 that were shipped over from someone called a palisado smith in England, somebody who specializes in gates and railings. And they're still there, and they're in reasonably good condition. And when you look at it, you know, it's very Georgian, very symmetrical. You have a nice clean line. The right matches the left, you know, very clean shapes. But then you take a step closer and you see all the little nuances. The scrolls are just a little bit different, a little out of balance. Some of the flowers are larger than others. You know, it has life to it. It was done cleanly, it was done efficiently and competently, but it was done in a manner that gives the piece life. That's really what we call the workmanlike manner, as we've talked before. Another really cool feature of that gate is the installation brackets. The installation brackets are horrible. They're these large pieces of iron that have been kind of welded together, but really aren't, and they're bent up and they're put in the masonry and then they're just bolted on. So what you're seeing is a local blacksmith, probably an enslaved smith on the plantation, installed that once those gates arrived. So I just think that's really cool to see those two, you know, juxtaposed. You know, I bet that smith was really good at repairing tobacco hose. I bet they could repair a strap hinge like no other. But this is probably the one and only time this smith ever will install decorative gates like this. So, you know, their skill set wasn't tailored to that. Again, kind of showing a specialty is real important in this work. All right, so I'll finish this up here. You know, as you continue to roll it up, you're going to be using more material to get less of a radius. So just something to think about as you're calculating the mass, the material you need for this. That was pretty loud, huh? All right, so that's pretty decent. It's not my favorite thing. There's definitely some flat spots in it, but it's enough. I'll tweak my thing here. It's a little bit bent and twisted. No, so it's actually the opposite way. So hopefully you have more mass down here. We could check it to see how we did. I probably, if I was going to do this again, would have made the scroll a little bit heavier, a little bit longer, farther out.
This one might be upside down.
This one might be upside down. It is upside down. We can fix that. We'll cut off some from the top.
I recently had to make a bunch of these. There's one pattern that we have at the shop, and we had a customer, he asked for shutter dogs, and we went and we said, here's a shutter dog. Do you like this shutter dog? He said, yeah, it's a fine shutter dog. I make them up, 24 shutter dogs. He comes and he looks at them and he says, oh, that's not the shutter dog I like. You know what I mean? He's like, I want the sexy one. You want the sexy one? What does that mean for a shutter dog? It's a shutter dog. He wants the one with the scroll. Well, the one with that scroll.
It was a fishtail scroll that he wanted, right?
He wanted, no.
Oh.
We first made the fishtail scroll for him. I think you were helping with that.
That was right when I was leaving.
But he didn't want the fishtail scrolls. All those fishtail scrolls ones are not ones he wanted. He wanted the one with the straight scroll. Well, I figured out the amount of length you need in that straight scroll for the shape of it is you need 9 inches of material before it gets scrolled. So you've got starting material that's 1/4 by 1, and you need to draw out 9 inches of it by hand into 1/4 inch square. That's not fun. I don't like that.
Good, thank you.
That's one of those cases where it's not really an efficient design that if I had my way, I wouldn't choose to make that design. But copying an original, that's what the original has. That's what I've got to do. I've tried a couple of different ways of doing it. See if there's any way I can take a shortcut to not have to draw out 9 inches of material by hand every time. I couldn't really find a shortcut that stopped you from having to do that. I think the only answer is get a striker to help you draw it out quicker.
So this is a real small detail, but I often think about the concept of like best practices. There's way more than one way to skin a cat, but there's, sometimes the best way to skin a cat. This it like hardly matters at all. On some things it does. But when I go to break this off in the vise, the part that I'm breaking off is on top. And that way my hammer blow isn't gonna affect what's down here. It mattered this morning, so I forgot to tell everybody this. So I made this slide bolt too short, so I had to trim my plate up. So it mattered this morning when I went to cut that. I didn't want to have to beat on this and then everything come out of flush and plane. So I just cut it off and was able to clamp it there in the vise. So it's just one of those little things that I think is sometimes important. Obviously in this case it doesn't matter that much. Say that again. Left and right? Not in this style. These would be, these are the same. They're symmetrical. So they hang vertical. I don't know where I put my punch. Man, I've lost a ton of things this demo. But yeah, they're supposed to be like that. All right, so the last thing I'll do is I'll just thin up that top section. I'll just give it a real small bend, just so there's something, that lip has something more visually appealing than just a straight bar that's stopping. How are we doing on time? Anyone have a? What's that?
12 o'clock.
It's 12 on the dot. Okay.
Is that stopping time?
I guess so.
I'm gonna make up one rivet here just to show what a rivet is. I mean, it's just a nail without a point. But figured I'd make one just for the heck of it.
For hot cutter, do you prefer an angle like you have there or a straight one, or does that matter?
They both work. I'm using this because that's what's sitting here in front of me. I usually like one that's straight. Like that. And I like a pretty fine edge. This is really stout for what I like to normally work with. I like it to be pretty fine. I cut faster that way. And regarding a biased hot cut or a even hot cut, I find you can use both of them to get the same job done. That if I'm working on an even hot cut and I want to cut it off the way that a bias hot cut does, well, instead of holding it flat on the hot cut, hold it at an angle. Cut it like that, and now with that uneven bias, now I'm back at 90, so I can get that 90-degree cut in there if that's what I want. And likewise, this one, if I want it to cut the way that a even hot cut can, I can cut it at an angle there, and now I'm back to my even hot cut that I wanted. They both work.
Yeah, our boss, yeah, he's not my boss anymore, but Ken Schwartz has a hinge that has the fastener still in it. So there's a rivet in the front one, and then 3 dog nails down the side. That's just, those are cool.
And
Cool.
what's really cool with that one is the door that it was mounted to rotted away, so the nails weren't ripped out of the door. They're still in the position they were in when they were in the
Right.
door. So they're all clinched. They're all bent over just the way that they were. So you can see how thick the door was. The door was an inch thick.
I've got one like that, but unfortunately it doesn't have the rivet. So always an exception to the rule. If I could have made that a little thinner, this would have been easier, but that's okay. What time does this silent auction end? 3 o'clock? Okay. Yeah, I'll get this stuff in here soon. Ooh, gosh. Well, does anybody have any last questions? Yeah. One is Early American Wrought Iron by Albert H. Son. And then the other one is it's called it's by Don Plummer. It's called the Sorber collection. Yeah. Sorber. There's a few other good ones. There's Iron at Winterthur. Winterthur spelled Winterthur.
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 Yes.
I'd say those are some good ones. That's a great like high-end stuff. You know, if you're interested in real pretty stuff. Can you think of any others?
No, those are two good ones.
I'd say those are my top three. I'd recommend that I can remember.
Is there, are those like good resources? Kind of like when you're talking about recording and is there a good way to kind of like learn more about particular styles for different states, different times?
Yeah, so, Son, is it Albert Son or Alfred Son?
It's Albert.
Son goes all up and down the East Coast, and his book is very well sourced. But every piece that he draws, he gives a location and a date for where it came from. So he's got Pennsylvania work, he's got Connecticut work, he's got Virginia work. So Son is a really good reference. Some of them aren't as well referenced as others. But for what's happening in America, Son is a good reference. For what's happening in Europe, I don't know as well what books there are. I've collected a couple over the years that, again, I don't know the titles of them. I just opened it. I was like, oh, Spanish ironwork. I need that book. It's full of Spanish iron, so I need it.
You gotta use Google Translate. Just like
I know we're not in the Southwest. We're kind of in the West-West.
West. This is the West, Josh.
Yeah, sometimes my geography's messed up. Like, I thought Virginia was in New England coming from Texas. I was like, it's over there. Like, isn't that New England? Then I was talking to like a Pennsylvania person. And I don't know, Pennsylvania people are interesting because all they want to talk about is coal when they come in the shop, which is kind of funny. But I referenced Pennsylvania as not Midwest, as New England, and they didn't like that. But yeah, we're in the West-West. But who's the New Mexico guy? Turley. Frank Turley wrote a book called Southwestern Colonial Ironwork, and that's a good book. It's earlier because the Spanish influence is a lot earlier in this area, or that area than any English. But that's a good one. There's some cool Spanish stuff in there.
If you want to go see some, if you go to San Antonio and go to the Governor's Palace,
Okay.
they have a really nice collection of early Spanish ironwork.
Huh.
And you hear the Governor's Palace, and you're thinking, well, this is an adobe building 2 stories tall,
Yeah.
and you're nondescript, but that was the palace back at that
Huh.
time.
That's cool.
And they've got a good collection in there.
Nice. Yeah, I need to check that out one day. I'm from Texas, so be easy to get back to.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show you, there's the rivet I made. The holes in this hinge that I punched, this is the one that I made back in Virginia. The punch that I had to work with there was way too big for what I would ordinarily like. So this rivet is not going to work in that hole. So I'm just going to say that that's not how it's supposed to fit, but this is the correct hardware, had that hole been the right size. The correct thing to do would be to get another nail header and make a bigger rivet to suit it, or somehow shrink the hole.
Or make the hole right the first time.
Yeah.
I'll say it was my punch, so that was the only punch I had, and I'll take the fall on that
If
one.
anyone wants to take a gander at this, you can pass it around if you'd like. There's a couple more ugly nails if anyone wants to look at some other nails. I was kind of out of practice this morning, so some of my early ones, the heads are thicker than I'd like. I'll also say if anyone wants to take a look at the nail header, it's a little warm. If anyone wants to look at that. So for ordinary common nails, it's the same except the holes